would make sense with Freemasonry.
Yep. I want to tee up that question first because they've been mentioning it in the chat as well, but give Dan a break, get some water here. But Noel, what do you think? What's your take on, if we're post-mill, all that kind of stuff? How did Freemasonry make a comeback after this millennial kingdom? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm actually right now, I had mentioned earlier tonight that I'm actually writing a paper this week on Moonraker, on the Roger Moore James Bond, and that movie is just loaded with the psyop, like all the different components, and it's the campiest of all the James Bond. People make fun of it, and they paint it in such a way that there's all these just random, loose, cartoony things that happen in it, and I'm showing how every single piece has a purpose. And in one of the scenes, which might be the most disturbing scene, and really it would definitely be a contender for one of the most disturbing scenes in any of the I'd say the 20th century James Bond films before Daniel Craig, is when this woman, she gets fired from the villain Drax, and they're in like this Tartarian French, this old world villa in Central California of all places, which is a old world clue there. But she goes running off into the woods, knowing that she sees the dogs and she knows what's about to happen. She gets terminated, and she knows what terminated means, and so she's running off. So I started doing this research on human hunting, and lo and behold, Wikipedia actually does have a little bit of an article on it, and they mentioned two groups of individuals. Actually, three groups that were used for human hunting at what I would call the close of the Millennial Kingdom into the Protestant Reformation Enlightenment. That is the Cathars. I'm going to mispronounce them. I don't have the paper in front of me. It's like not the Wimbledons or whatever, but it's the Sabbath keeping group that Ellen White said was an extension of Seventh-day Adventists. And they were, of course, terminated because they were Sabbath keepers. There was a huge extinction event of those individuals, and the Cathars, and then also the Anabaptists, who in my last years as a Protestant, I no longer call myself a Protestant, but my last year as a Protestant, when I was, trying to make it work in the church, I was really attracted to the Anabaptists based on a lot of their views. And if you go to any Anabaptist church today, like it would be the Brethren Church or the Independent Baptist Church or the Amish, actually, they're an extension of it too. Hardly any of them actually hold the original views. The Protestant Reformation has basically steamrolled over all these old denominations and changed all their views. Anyways, I'm looking at the fact that like 1 million Cathars were exterminated in a short time by the Roman Catholic Church. And then when you dig into it, you find out that the Cathars never really existed. They were made up by the Roman Catholic Church. Long story, including all their views, all that kind of stuff. But they were my point is I believe they were systematically hunting down and murdering anyone who was not going along with the regime change. That there was a huge regime change at the end of the Middle Ages. Rome comes into power, and right when the Cathars are being murdered off, again, like 1 million of them in a very short time, they're being hunted down like literally by dogs. The dogs are hunting people down and killing them, and they're tearing children away from the mothers. It was a horrible time for millions of people all across Europe. And at the same time, the Knight Templar disappeared. Now, I hold a very unpopular opinion, and Dan, you feel free to disagree with me on this. But I have looked into the possibility that actually the Templars were the good guys, and almost everything that we know about the Templars is the same thing we know about the Cathars. Now, keep in mind, nobody who was one of them actually called themselves that. They actually called themselves good Christians. None of them called themselves Cathars. That was a invention of the Roman Catholic Church. Everything we know about them comes through the propaganda in the Kangaroo Court. And actually, we find that they were actually rejecting the crucifix. They were rejecting the Eucharist, all these things in favor of something that was far more biblically grounded. And everything we know about the Knight Templar as well pretty much comes through the Kangaroo Court, the propaganda at the end, which reminds us of Nuremberg. It reminds us of, well, we'll just say Nuremberg for a second. I'm going to take, I know you don't want to take it there, Dan, but I just imagine I look in like 1945 and I see those Germans sitting in that courtroom, and I just look at their faces sometimes as all these charges are being read against them. They're looking around like what the hell? Like, am I in the Twilight Zone? What is this? What kind of reality is this that they're accusing me of this stuff? So okay, here's my thought. So Freemasonry officially, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, was 1717. It was founded in 1770, like early 18th century.
I think that's right. Some may go back as far as like mid 1600s, so mid 17th century maybe, but yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and there are also records, perhaps, of lodges being recorded in the at the earliest in like the mid to late 1500s in Scotland. That is a possibility as well. So my theory on this is that, and they're going to claim descendancy from the Templars and other things like that. This is basically just the inheritors coming in, and they're kind of claiming, it's kind of controlled opposition. They're claiming something that existed one time as their own now. And so, I mean, to answer the question, obviously, I don't know how the transition happened, but I believe the Millennial Kingdom ended around 1500-ish. So you got a 200-year window there. If we're looking at 1717, you got a 200-year window between the end of that and the beginning officially of Freemasonry. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that was a deep question there. I knew Dan couldn't take that one, so you had that one. So Dan, let's get in some rapid fire questions here. How did the third degree affect you emotionally or spiritually? Was it uplifting, confusing, or even unsettling? Specifically the third degree. Yeah,
I would say it. Honestly, the surprising answer is that it was uplifting. It felt good. That's the kind of the thing we got to really be caution about this, because it seems obvious to us that you wouldn't want to join that, or it would be super dark. But it actually was a good thing. I felt like I felt like I received a lot of new information. I received some new friends. Gave me something to do. Where I was living up north, it's kind of boring, gets a little cold. If the birds aren't playing, there's not a lot going on up there. So I think my experience, honestly, was for the most part was a pleasant one. It wasn't until I hit that moment where I was like, maybe there's something more here than what I realized.
Some good desserts.
Yeah, good. Oh, another thing I want to say too, just to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Noel's saying. I think Freemasonry at one point, I hesitate to say this, but here we are, maybe had good intentions. That the idea was to take your obligation between you and God, and that was your obligation. But like most human institutions, at some point it sort of got taken over mafia style, where these brothers now, these Masons now, think that when you break the obligation, and I tell a secret and I tell the password, that this is an affront on them. That it's like a gang now, that I've taken my obligation to them, and they're personally upset. Like, what do you care if I'm saying the passwords? Why does that affect you? It doesn't, is the reality. But it sort of got taken over like a gang, mafia style ran kind of thing. So I think that was probably the moment that it really lost its luster, when that happened. Yeah,
and let me throw in there too, and I want to say this up front, that just so everyone out there, I have never taken an oath. I have never entered a lodge. I never wore the very gay attire, and nor will I ever. But I'm not. A lot of times when people hear like the word esoteric or something like that, they take it almost like as a dark threat, and maybe it's because it's things that they don't understand, they don't know, whatever. The fact of the matter is, and I've stated this many times, that for me, the Book of Enoch explains the history of the world better than really anything else. I mean, it takes all the different religions out there and it flips them on their head. And when you talk about the worthless mysteries that the Watchers gave to humanity, the reason they were worthless was because they didn't teach Yah's instructions in righteous living. For example, Azazel. Now, I'm not wearing any dyes today. Michael, you're wearing a very satanic T-shirt there. It was Azazel. Hopefully you know where I'm going with this, Michael. It was actually Azazel, who I believe is the Hasatan. He is the very one the serpent who tempted Eve, and we'll be going there tonight. He was the one that introduced swords, dyes and clothing. So if we wear any clothing with dyes, that originated, guys, from Azazel himself. All right. If anyone owns any kind of weapon, like the steel, that's angelic technology, that comes from Azazel. And we know it comes from heaven because in Genesis 3, the cherubim are guarding the tree of life. They're guarding Eden with swords. So he's taking an actual heavenly technology and he's giving it to man. And the mysteries themselves are not the threat. The threat is that they did not instruct in righteousness, in Yah's laws. And so this is how I feel about any of these, Freemasonry or any of them, is that a lot of the concepts they talk about, yes, they're going to read the same Bible we are, and they're going to twist some concepts to go in their favor. But they're looking at a lot of the same kind of abstract, esoteric stuff. So these could be understood by a very righteous people in the past. And at some point in time, I think maybe you really hit my point, Dan, almost better than I did really there, that there was some point in time where the controllers came in, the inheritors came in, and they made it their own. I could take the pillars, for example. I mean, I've seen architecture that I believe predates Freemasonry, where there's a lot of emphasis on these two pillars. What did it mean for them? Is it the same thing that the way Freemasonry takes it today? So,
yeah.
Yeah,
and we actually did an episode on that too, the secrets of the fallen angels. We talked about that. Seems like every episode we do, it's exactly how you said it. We just did one, honor your father and mother. That word honor could be honor the Lord with your wealth, or Pharaoh hardening his heart was dishonoring him. So it's literally, there's two sides of the same. Dan and Noel kind of mentioned it too, that he didn't take any. But were there any specific oaths or obligations within the third degree in hindsight you feel conflicted with your loyalty to Jesus within the third degree?
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me start with saying like what didn't conflict, because one would think any oath in general is conflicting, right? You're not supposed to take oaths. And part of the argument you always hear is like, well, what about if you get married and you take covenant? What if you join the military? You got to do an oath. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't be doing that oath either. But part of the oath was like, if one of your brothers were to pass away, you would help take care of his wife and his family. Like, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to take an oath to promise to do. But the penalties themselves get a little weird. Like in the third degree, like the reason you have, you do this sign about the third degrees, you're saying you're going to saw yourself in half essentially, and you're going to disembowel yourself and throw the disembowel like your guts on like a heaping pile of dung so that the beasts of the fields can eat. I mean, that starts to get a little weird, right? Like Jesus says, let your yeses be yeses and your no's be no. And this is definitely crossing over that line. So no doubt when you get into the penalty side of things, it definitely feels very strange.
Yeah. You mentioned it too earlier. Did you ever question who or what the great architect of the universe represented during this degree or later on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I kind of went into it, like I took it for what they were telling me it meant, which is essentially the supreme grand architect just is a variable, right? It's an algebra. It's just it's A, and you decide what it means, right? You define it. But to go back to the 32nd degree, I think someone in the chat asked, is it safe to say that a 32nd degree Mason wouldn't really know what they're doing? I would say yes. Even all the way to 32nd degree, it's kind of all the same thing. It's just your need to know only basis. Now, this is where I have to say I didn't experience this personally, so this is just an opinion. But when you get to the 33rd degree, I think it's invite only, never went there myself, but I read like Morals and Dogma with Albert Pike. And he essentially says that, I don't know if it's the password or what is revealed to you in that degree, is that Lucifer is the god of Freemasonry. And so if we take Albert Pike on his words, I think it's safe to say that the grand architect of the universe eventually is revealed as Lucifer, the higher up you go.
It seems to me that Albert Pike, is favored by, red pillars to, point out Freemasonry. Have you experienced, though, other Masons going like, yeah, Albert Pike is an embarrassment to us, like we don't follow Albert Pike?
Yeah, actually, I not quite to that extent, but I remember early on I was having breakfast with a past grandmaster, and I asked him about Albert Pike, and he said, "I don't know, man. I just got done reading Morals and Dogma. It just seems like he's like just trying to use big words just to use big words." And so that there was certainly a criticism there. So they didn't seem to align with him exactly.
A lot of the that's kind of 19th century literature in a nutshell, and a lot of the theosophists like Blavatsky and stuff, they love big words like that too. I did want to ask about your thoughts on taking oaths or vows. I mean, you've taken some, and how do you place yourself in that now?
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of taking oaths. I think yeses are yeses and no's are no's. That's it.
No, what I mean, I agree. I agree. But in terms of being a former Mason and having taken some vows, how do you see yourself with that now?
I see. Okay. So, man, the enemy tries to whisper condemnation here. If I'm honest, this is where the enemy really tried to throw me off, especially early on. He was like, it's too late. You've already taken an obligation. It's too late for you. But what I would say is the power of what happened on the cross. There's nothing that's too late. I don't think it's the definition of the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. So I don't think it's the unpardonable sin, but I do certainly think it was sinful. And something I beg for mercy over. But if I'm not careful, the enemy will get in there and cause condemnation at this point. But man, I regret it. I wish I could have never done it. If I could do it all over again.
I want to throw this out too. And, about the idea of rescinding vows. So I'm going to give a quick story here. Now, by the way, I've given an oath or two, a vow or two in my life. One was when I got married. I gave a vow to my wife, and which I have since rescinded, and I'm going to explain that in a second. And the other one was when I joined the Army. Now, there are a lot of military people in this crowd who are my friends, a lot of Marines, stuff like that, and they will tell you, and I can tell you too, that when you join the armed forces, you take a vow to defend the Constitution. That is a vow for life. I took a vow to defend the Constitution. Now, my perspective on this is that a vow is a vow. And I'm not trying to, put any dark, accusation thoughts on anybody or put anyone to despair, but that was a vow I took when I was 18 years old, and to defend the Constitution. Now, in the case with my wife, it's kind of interesting. When we were married for 20 years, we were like, I love you, honey, let's get a divorce. And actually what we did is we rescinded our marriage. We didn't actually divorce. And what we did is we divorced ourselves from the government, and we actually officially rescinded our marriage. So we are no longer in a contract with the government. We made a vow to each other, but in rescinding from the contract, we're basically saying, I don't know we didn't realize what we were doing when we entered this contract. So we want to remove ourselves from it now. And so I would throw that out there, I guess, theologically, because, God works through his law, obviously. And for those out there where you've gotten into the situation, maybe there are people, Masons watching this who go like, I'm going to get out of this. I'm kind of stuck in this, to the same approach. Like, I didn't realize that this was actually worshiping Lucifer at the top. I didn't realize these things. I didn't realize the Canaanite aspect or, these darker elements. And I'm seeing it now, and I want out, and I'm going to rescind this contract. And, you take it to Christ, or as I call him, Yahshua. That's why I always struggle when I say, Christ, because it's like a translation. I'm so used to saying Yahshua, Messiah by this point. I'm like, oh yeah, we're talking about Jesus Christ here. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. Dan, this was a question from my wife, but it kind of fits right here. She asked, So how many people are 33rd degrees? Any guesses? And especially maybe locally, like, did you know 100 of them, or was it like 2?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, I have no idea how many we might be dealing with now, but I would say in my local jurisdiction, I probably knew less than 30 in the entire state, and I was pretty well traveled. I went to a lot of different lodges and stuff, so it's a pretty exclusive group.
Okay.
And I think Disney might have a 33 club or something like that too.
That's true.
Disneyland has Club 33.
Yeah. All right.
With that, Dan, you just mentioned that. Would you say that is an official lodge?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I always just took it as kind of some little tip off that nobody really knew what it was until recently. But I was just that I don't know why that just came to me. So
yep. I tend to agree with what you're saying, the latter. I think it's probably its own separate club, but it was certainly meant to signal to Masons.
Yeah.
So this one was from a Discord chat, Yoshiyahu. I think he's in the YouTube chat as well. He said, I shook a man's hand once and avoided touching him with my index finger because I had just taken a cha. And he says, when I used chew tobacco, he then began talking to me, saying something about, that's no way to treat a widow's son. Any idea what this message I had given him with my handshake? We talked about widow's son a little bit, but can you be more specific with what he's asking?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So there's definitely handshakes involved, but not so much with the index finger. So that part's the part that's throwing me off. How you signify who, the level you are as a Mason is with your thumb and the placement of your thumb. So for him to have placed his index finger in maybe a strange place, seems weird to me that he kind of went into this Masonic. Also, here's what I would say too, that there's a good chance that you ran into a clandestine Mason. So a clandestine Mason is someone that looks like one. The lodges have all the symbolism. From the outside looking in, there's no distinction. You wouldn't know the difference. But there's groups called like the International Free and Accepted Masons who don't have a charter from the Grand Lodge. So in order to be considered an actual real Mason, you've got to be part of a lodge that's chartered. And so who knows what kind of riffraff might be getting taught in these clandestine lodges. That might be really where you're getting the real super weird stuff because there's just no telling. It's unregulated. And so I would say there's a good chance because that's not normally what's asked. Why would you don't normally go to the widow's son language. You would say something like, are you a traveling man? It's nice to meet you. Are you a traveling man? That's a more common thing to ask when you're trying to ask if somebody's a Mason. So I think there's a good chance. And then you couple that with the index finger. I think there's a good chance you came into some clandestine.
I only ever got asked that question once in my life. This would have been almost 20 years ago at this point. It was like 2007, 2008 in there. And I was a photographer working a gig. I'm sitting at the bar, taking a break, kind of having a drink. And this guy comes up and he's talking to me. And I didn't know about this back then, but it was, that moment always stuck with me. It really bothered me. And all of a sudden his facial expression changes. Like he wanted to get this out. And he asked me, are you a traveling man? And I don't know. I said, yeah, I travel all over the place. And I'm to give him this answer. And he was like really disappointed. I'm like, why did I disappoint this guy? I answered his question and told him all the place. But yeah, he was, I guess, fishing for that information. So I keep waiting to get that question again. Are you a traveling man? And, I'm going to try to see how far I can carry that.
It's just funny though. They're looking for secret words, so they'll open up to you and buy you a drink or something.
I just say, "Are you a Freemason?" Yeah, exactly.
Should I be like Tubal Cain or Boaz, something like that?
So Dan, the next one, the guys in the chat too, Visionary Vet. I hope he can elaborate more, but he said, "Did you learn the secret meaning of number 322?" He's saying recent events may reveal it's not about Genesis 322. We've talked about that, but can you just talk more about that? Any additional info?
Yeah, I think that's primarily Skull and Bones. And I think there's most certainly a connection between Skull and Bones and Freemasonry. But I haven't done enough research to really offer a super intelligent response there, but I'm sure there's something.
Yeah. Billy McAllen from the chat. And this is interesting too, because I remember a story with you personally. The biggest damage to common folks at Freemason Lodge conduct is workplace collusion. If there's a common enemy at work and the Masons decide together, they will destroy that person's career. Any takes on that, Dan? And if you don't recall, I'm going to bring up something later.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, again, like with these obligations, and after it got taken over mafia style, there is this sense that, like, if I say, like, you're going to help me as a brother, I'm a brother in distress, and distress can be anything. I mean, the troublemaker at work, I want you to conspire against him and take him out. Sure, I think that certainly could be a thing. I had a guy that worked with me. He was Freemason. He was actually at my raising when I became a Master Mason. He worked for one of our competitors and then came on board, and he did nothing. I mean, he sat there and just did nothing. Like, oh, good old fashioned hire me. I'm just going to ride this sucker out until they fire me. And right before I moved, we were sitting down in the basement. Everybody's kind of hanging out, playing ping pong. You know, we're kind of like late into the night. Everybody's sort of not paying attention. And he sort of whispers to me, "Hey, man, you know, you don't have to go to the black side. You don't have to go to the Prince Hall brothers." For those of you that are familiar, Prince Hall is all black Freemasons. Ancient Free Accepted tends to be all white. There's still a lot of racial tension even there. So anyways, I was like, okay. And he's like, "I'm going to set you up when you go down, when you move down south. I'm going to make sure they take care of you." And he said, "Why do you think I'm working here?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Why do you think I even work here, man? It's to keep an eye on you." And I'm like, "What?" Like, that's wild, bro. So yeah, there's no doubt stuff like that goes on. No doubt.
That's what I was going to bring up. So that's awesome that you said it. Okay, so the next one, Katja J from the chat. The Freemasons run the Order of Assassins, who MK Ultra their assassins and who are the school shooters. Goes back to Lee Harvey Oswald. And he takes on, I know we didn't say we want to do Illuminati, but this is kind of a...
Yeah, what I would say is, here's what I would say, that if that's true, just about zero Masons know about it. So there's circles within circles within circles within circles. And what my experience was, it started real broad. You basically knew nothing. Then I got invited to start showing up on a different lodge night. So instead of meeting on Thursday night when we did our normal lodge thing, we met on a Tuesday night, and it was way different. It was like all about meditation. So you as you kind of work your way up, you get into smaller circles. So it wouldn't surprise me if something like that's going on. But what I can say for certainty is 99% of Masons would have no idea about it.
It's easy to just gloss.
Which is what we kind of highlighted earlier too, that with a 33-degree Mason, you have to be invited into that, and you're fished out of the pool and kind of brought into this. It's kind of like with the moon landings, where of the very few people in the history of humanity who have walked onto the Hollywood soundstage, they were, I think, like all Eagle Scouts. And it's almost the same thing, where obviously very few people in Boy Scouts become Eagle Scouts. But then those Eagle Scouts can easily be, fished into, kind of these deeper circles, so to speak. So just throwing that in, that I'm always surprised when, I'll say this for like the late end of the crowd, for those of you kind of joining in now, I'm always surprised when there's this idea that like all Freemasons are they're all in on it, and it's like, no, not really.
Nope. Visionary vet again. Remember when they opened the doors of the Vatican last year? Remember the strange color robes they were wearing? Those are the colors of the Eastern Star Lodge. Any take on that, Dan, about Eastern Star?
Yeah, Eastern Star is sort of the female Freemasonry. As you know, Freemasons are male, is a male-only fraternity, but they open it up to females from the Eastern Star perspective. I mean, it's literally a pentagram, so I don't think that requires a ton of, like, we don't have to explain that, right? It is a pentagram, so I don't know. And I do know, I was never an Eastern Star myself, but they really tried to pressure my wife to become one. They really want you guys all being involved in it.
What power does Eastern Star hold? Because we put a lot of emphasis, like the card for tonight, the cover, I put a bunch of dudes who were in Freemasonry on it. I had, kind of fun there making my little collage, cutting and pasting and that sort of stuff. But there's not a big emphasis on women who are in Eastern Star.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, there's some speculation. What's the famous lady's name for Underground Railroad? Is it Harriet Tubman?
Yeah, Tubman.
All right. There's some speculation that Harriet Tubman was an Eastern Star. I don't really know if there's any validity to that, but I would say, man, not much. It's more, I think, about a sticking point to get the females, more involved, and so that you can continue to stay more involved as a man. And I do know that to open an Eastern Star Lodge or whatever their meetings are called, there has to be a Master Mason present. So a man has to be presiding over it for them to even open a lodge. Also in chat, I saw Christopher seems to be pro-Masonic. What he's saying there is to be one, ask one. And that's kind of their thing. Like you're coming on your own free will and accord, they're not recruiting you and that kind of thing. But I would say don't ask to be one. You're not missing much there.
So this one's interesting. David Rizzuto Jr. Masons talk the talk, but they either are clueless or outright liars because you never hear them speak about the serpents. Well, David, you got to check out Bromalogy. We talk about it all the time. So there's anything to add there, Dan, that they're just all outright liars. We're going to paint them all with the same brush.
Masons in general are all liars. I don't think that's true. I don't think so. I think for the most part, they're upstanding citizens. They're good men for the most part. They're just part of something because they're bored and they're trying to get a day away from the wife. A lot of these guys are retired and don't have anything else to do. But again, I think it's a shell of maybe what it used to be. It's not. And there's a lot of counterfeit, man. Like we went over with the passwords, all the counterfeiting going on, stealing stuff from the Bible, even like the symbols and stuff. Like if you look at the Scottish Rite, double-headed eagle, and if you're in the northern jurisdiction, the wings are pointing up. Southern jurisdictions, they're pointing down. It generally has a 32 or a 33 in the middle of a triangle. That is stolen from the Orthodox Church. I mean, you can look back. The Orthodox Church had that back in like the 6th century. They were using that symbol. Masonic stole it, almost 1,000 years later and claimed it for themselves. So this is a common theme where they seem to be stealing what the church has always been doing since the 1st century and claiming it for themselves.
Possibly stealing buildings.
And talking about, good people in there. And of course, I want to know, I have to say this because someone's going to use my words against me, that I'm not justifying anyone ever joining the craft. But, looking like 100 years ago, you got the Great Depression in the 30s, and even in the 1920s, there was of course, the KKK was pretty popular back then too. They would have their parade routes, but you'd see this huge emphasis on Freemasonry, and they would all get out there, and they're even you look at Sears catalogs, and they would have whole pages on Masonic attire you could buy. But when people are desperate for work and they're out there trying to, work their craft, I could totally see why a lot of people would be attracted to something where you get into this club and all of a sudden, boom, people are hiring you in your business and that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of job security in that too. And so I could see a situation in the past, today I will say this though, that ever since moving to the American South, you see a lot of cars with the Masonic, the compass, the square and the compass on the back. It's never junky cars. They're usually pretty nice cars. And every single time, I've been putting myself to the test on this 10 years. In 10 years, I have yet to ever see a square and compass getting pulled over by a police officer. I'm looking forward to the day when I see it. I'm like, aha, and I'll be honking as I pass them or something like that. Probably not the best idea. But I'll be so excited, But I always look, and they never have a square and compass when they're pulled over. So there's got to be something going on with that. It can't be a coincidence that with the police.
Oh, I think you're right. I was never pulled over. I used to be that guy that I had 4 of them on there. I was like, I'm Scottish Rite, I'm Blue House, I'm Red House. What else am I? I don't know, but I'm just gonna put that on there. And I almost actually went to the Purple House, the cryptic. I will say that the York Rite side was by far more fascinating than the Scottish Rite. I thought the Scottish Rite was kind of lame. The York Rite claims to be the Christian arm. So after you become a 3rd degree, the world kind of opens up to you. You can kind of go up one of the 2 sides of the compasses. And the York Rite side I thought was way more fascinating. And the equivalent to a 32 or 33rd degree on the York Rite side is the Knights Templar. So that's what that is. So 32nd degree, 33rd degree on the Scottish Rite side, that's what that is. But if same equivalency would be Knights Templar. And I never went that far. I intended to, if I didn't run into that, oh boy, we need to get out of here. My next step was I actually got invited into the Purple Lodge. I was getting ready to go do my purple degrees, the cryptic degrees. And then after that was Knights Templar.
Quick question. This is just for my own knowledge. Is there any color associated with the York Lodge at all?
Yeah, it would be. So the first 3 degrees are blue. And then the next step for the York Rite, which is 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th degrees, is red. So it's called the red house. So you and then next is purple, and then Knights Templar.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to combine like two here, Ashley Bruno and SP Mama. Basically, are Shriners considered Freemasons? And then also the connection with Mormonism. I don't think you studied too much on Mormonism. Can you speak on Shriners and Mormonism?
Yeah, for sure. So there's really good questions. Yes, Shriners are connected with Freemasons, no doubt. It used to be back in the day that you had to be a 33rd degree or you had to be Knights Templar to even join the Shrine. So it used to be like the exclusive club was the Shriners. Then I think, this is speculation, but I think they just basically opened it up to everybody because they were starting to lose membership. So now really any 3rd degree Mason can now go directly to the Shriners without ever going through Scottish Rite or York Rite. And we're seeing a lot of people do that. But yes, it is a Masonic institution, no doubt. And it's the Islamic arm of it. So all of Freemasonry, the whole craft, if you will, is borrowing and stealing from the Abrahamic religions. And so they're kind of covering all of them and perverting all of them. And then as far as Mormonism, from what I understand, yes, that is absolutely connected to Masonry. I've never gone through the rituals in the Mormon church, but from what I understand, you have to like shake hands through this door or something. And there's definitely no doubt Masonic connection between the Church of Latter-day Saints. No question.
Okay, I'm going back to this York thing again. I'm sorry, but with the Templars, is there, because with the Templars, they would have the red cross of St. George, but there was a lot of white going on. So there's no white whatsoever.
If I recall correctly, it was primarily black garb with the red cross. If I recall, I might be mistaken.
That's interesting. Okay.
So wise guys or wire guys from the chat, we kind of talked about it. I hope your answers were sufficient. He wanted to know about connections between Templar, Knights of Christ, and Freemasonry. I think we did a decent job here. No, that's all the questions I have, but we do kind of want to transition into Serpent Seed for a little bit. I know Dan probably has 10 minutes left or so, but we could talk Serpent Seed and how it relates with the Cain religion and what we're trying to portray.
Because what's the big deal, right? Tubal Cain. Yeah. So what? The big deal is Cain, his 5th great grandfather.
Well, yeah, and I wanted to have this discussion, and whatever time you have, Dan, I don't want to take over your time. As I was saying before we went live, that just in the last couple of weeks, I just did a 2-week. It was supposed to be a 1-week presentation. It ended up being 3. It actually ended up being 3 because I was thrown in YouTube jail over it, and whatever got drawn out. But Michael, you and I have been talking about Serpent Seed for, I think, as long as I've known you. And it's probably been, I haven't done the math. It's been about 5 years by this point, almost. And I've been covering a lot of my presentations and my writings. And it occurred to me that I have never given a formal presentation on it. So it's crazy that I just gave my first formal presentation on it. You guys beat me to it. You guys did it. And I thought this would be a great follow-up. And I'm kind of interested, maybe a good segue into this is Dan and Michael, you guys give your experiences on really the cost of this, like how controversial it truly is to talk about Serpent Seed.
Yeah, Dan will have more of a tangible story, but basically we've run into issues. People get really mad. Each person has their own truth topics where if you cross that line, they're going to go ballistic on you. But we had a friend who went kind of ballistic on us and was going off on just our episode. Dan, you want to kind of share how it escalated a little bit?
Yeah. She's a friend of ours, and she had reached out to Michael and I through a text first and saying, hey, y'all need to take down the Serpent Seed episode. Like, okay. Help us understand why. And then she sent us a link to somebody else's research. And I don't know, maybe I probably wasn't the most polite when I responded, but I just don't do well when someone sends me somebody else's research. Like if you want to correct me on something, please correct me. Tell me where we're wrong. And so it was some kind of like random Pentecostal pastor that had was basically connecting it with racism. And clearly Michael and I were not using it for racism or trying to say that any race is elite or anything like that. And I think there have been in the past people that he used it for that reason. So she asked us to take it down for that reason. And we said, we respectfully disagree. And then she came back and Michael said, could you please tell us what sin we've committed here? Like what sin have we committed? and she wasn't able to do that. So we basically were like, hey, look, thank you for letting us know, but we're going to keep this episode up. Well, she called my place of business. And remember, I work at a church. So she called the main receptionist desk and said that I was preaching racism. And just for those of you who don't know, my wife is Black. So it's kind of ironic, but certainly somebody can be married to a Black woman and still be racist, but it would definitely be hard to get there. So anyways, thank God.
Not to mention you had a funner time at the Black Lodge, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was literally part of a Black fraternity. I have 2 kids that are half Black. So it's like, thankfully the church knew that. So they were like, okay, that doesn't sound right. So initially they tried to say, hey, look, just tell him it's a personal podcast. It has nothing to do with the church. And then, she came back and again accused, I need to talk to somebody, he's being racist. And so there was no doubt a demonic attack there where, they were coming for us, bro. There is something about this message that the enemy does not want it out there.
That and the false feminine spirit. It was like back to back. We got hit big on those two.
A lot of spiritual warfare. Yeah.
Yeah. I always find it, the longer you're in this, I'm speaking to Bromalogy here. The longer you guys are in this and the more subjects you cover, you're going to find that where I hate to use a food example, but you know what? I love food. Everybody knows that. So one of the things I really miss living on the East Coast in America now, of course, I'm in Europe for the rest of the year, but is In-N-Out. I love In-N-Out. In-N-Out is the bomb. And do you have an In-N-Out where you're at, Dan?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, here's what In-N-Out does really well.
You're a traveling man. No, I was playing.
Here's what In-N-Out does really well. You go in there and on the menu, they don't have chicken nuggets. They don't have tacos. The only thing they have is a burger and a fry. You can get a single, you can get a double, you can get a double. You can get a double animal style with fries, but that's all you get. And it's really good, right? So it's the same thing with content providers, where if you just do one thing repeatedly, you build a really good audience. The moment you start touching on, 1 or 2 other things, people will just freak out, and they're like, I can't handle this. I can't handle this. Bye, I'm gone. So anyways, that's me, gushing out my, my frustrations. I will say this too. I know this is, I didn't bring you on, Dan, to get on the therapist couch, but, you said how you don't take well when people like give you other people's research, that type of stuff, respond to what I feel the same way, because every single time, almost every time I put something else out, somebody comes along and says, you need to, they'll give me somebody else's research, somebody else or whatever. And I'm like, did you read mine? Like, did you look at mine? Can we talk about what I put out? Like, that kind of thing. Anyways, so let's talk about the Canaanites. Let's tie this into Freemasonry, because you guys brought this up earlier, the Canaanite bloodline. And are you tying in? We know about obviously Cain and then the Canaanites. When you guys think of Canaanites today, what comes to your mind in today's world, not in the biblical world?
I remember Skiba talking about this a year or so before he passed, unfortunately, but that word was similar to trafficking. So that leads me right to the human trafficking lineage that seems running rampant right now. That's my initial thought on that.
Well, okay. So do you guys, when I didn't watch your Serpent Seed episode, just, so I'm not really sure where you completely tied it in on. And just if there's anybody listening and you're like, huh, you don't even know what we're talking about. We're talking about Cain, and correct me if I'm on a different track from you guys. Cain is the literal, like in Rosemary's Baby sense, he is the literal son of Satan himself. Through intercourse with Eve, they had Cain, and then we have the genealogy of Cain going all the way down to Tubal-Cain and Naamah, and then the flood happens. And then of course, I think you guys are probably going. I know you are going to Michael, that you're going to track with me on this. That Ham also would be a descendant through Naamah, continuing the line of Cain forwards. So what I'm trying to get at here is that when you're talking about Serpent Seed in the world today, what comes to your mind? Are you guys talking about blue bloods?
No.
is Freemasonry trying to attract this bloodline, or like what are we looking at here?
I apologize, I didn't understand. Yeah, Dan, you want to talk about that? I was kind of the host role on our episode about what he was presenting on Serpent Seed.
Yeah, I think that they're pointing to the fact that there is this royal bloodline, and they're telling you the story and the tale of it, and they're glorifying it as a good thing. They're trying to respin the narrative. So you've heard before, like, Satan's actually the good guy. It's kind of like that. And when we did our research, we found that a lot of people thought that the Canaanite bloodline died off, even if that's true, even if Cain was literally the son of Satan, it died off during the flood. But I don't know if you recall that movie Noah. Did anybody ever see that? And that movie Noah, you saw it? Well, there's this depiction of a man who snuck onto the ark. And do anybody remember what that man's name was that snuck onto the ark?
Well, I could answer it, but I don't know if it's like you're waiting for.
Yeah, no, it's Tubal-Cain. And yeah. I think they're depicting that bloodline did survive the flood. And we see that when we get to Numbers, for example. Joshua goes into the promised land. It's like, yeah, we're like grasshoppers compared to them. So I think this bloodline, I don't know, to answer your question directly, like, are they trying to attract that bloodline? I think it's more like they're telling this, like, that's where it comes from. That's what Masonry's like roots are, is we are those people.
I think great evidence that Noah actually married Naamah is because she's listed. I mean, why would you first of all, of course, we have to ask the question, why is Moses tracking these two genealogies if one of them was killed off? What's the point? Because Cain would have had, by the time he gets to the flood, how many thousands of descendants, right? But there is a very specific line that is brought down. Why? If Moses is just going to bring up a genealogy that was killed off, he had to pick the litter, right? But then why did he mention Naamah at the end? He doesn't mention any of the women. He mentions the two wives, the Tubal-Cain, but he mentions Naamah there at the end, which is really, really interesting. And of course, when we get to one of the things, that's one of the reasons that I believe that Writings of Abraham is legit, even if it is, there are passages in there, by the way, that only line up with the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is very, very eerie. Considering that the Writings of Abraham was discovered first before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. But even if it was, say, written in the 1800s by a Freemason, whatever, as a confessional, the confessional in and of itself it's pretty stunning, and it makes all the sense in the world to me. So the idea, of course, is that Noah married Naamah. He actually would have had a couple wives, one wife, which came from the line of Shem, the Seth. I'm stumbling tonight on my words. Michael, I'm calling you Matthew and whatever. That he had Japheth and Shem with, but of course, Naamah is who he had Ham with, which would have then continued the line that we get to the Canaanites. After that, we get Nimrod and it
wasn't it Ham that uncovered the nakedness of his father? And when we look at Leviticus, the nakedness means to, like, don't sleep with your mother. That's your father's nakedness. And yeah. So I think there's an argument to be made that Ham literally slept with his mom, and that continued that Canaanite hybrid genealogy right on down the line. And I think it ended up going to man, what's the guy's name when we're talking like Tower of Babel, who was running things around that time? Nimrod, exactly. I think it goes to Nimrod, comes from Ham's line. Yep.
Now, I come from a slightly different perspective, and I'm not looking to, derail anyone, but and I gave it a couple weeks ago. There were some people kind of pushing back right away, but a lot of people, I think, were thinking about it and going, this is kind of interesting. Is that I'm of the opinion that the blue bloods today are not the line of Cain, that they're actually the sons of Yasharel. And people will tell me, like, well, no, like, why are they so wicked then? Well, look at a single king in the line of Israel and tell me a single righteous king in there. There were no righteous kings. They were wicked people. I mean, this is where we get Ahab and Jezebel from on the Israel side. There were a few righteous kings from Judah. They fared a little bit better. There were some so-so kings in there, but then there were some wicked kings as well. And this is the what I've really had to wrestle with, because we've already brought up the Millennial Kingdom. So there are some people who are watching this going like, what in the world is this guy talking about? But if the Millennial Kingdom was ushered in, and there are multiple prophecies, I could probably source at least 12 of them. I could probably pull up a document right now, show that the seed of the serpent pretty much they're wiped out. They're gone. They're eliminated. And so we know around in the 500s, there appears to be a mass extinction event. Now, the chroniclers don't really want to talk about this openly, but I've spoken to those within genealogy, and they will admit to me, yeah, it appears that there was a huge population explosion in the 500s, that basically almost all families on the earth derive from these few individuals, almost like a Noah's Ark kind of situation. Then we see another one happening again in the late 1700s. But if it did indeed happen, and then there's this repopulation through the resurrected sainthood, which I think is pretty exciting. It actually means that this is who we're derived from, that there seems to be maybe a focus on that. For example, I'm studying the Templars, and I went to the temple in London, the Templar, the temple in London where the Magna Carta, Prince John, or he was King John at that time, and they were trying to get him to sign the Magna Carta and all that. A lot of those people in that temple went on to sign the Declaration of Independence and so on and so forth. I noticed that in most of the American royalty, like if you're a Marilyn Monroe, Lucille Ball type, whoever, these really, really royal people, they're descended from these Magna Carta sureties. For the longest time, I'm like, why? What is it about these Magna Carta, guys? Like Marilyn Monroe has like 12 patriarchs that she's descended from who were these signers. Now, people will tell me, well, it's really easy to do. No, it's not. I'm not related to any of these guys. I cannot find anything on record. And so sometimes I wonder if they're actually, if it's actually flipped or reversed. That's not saying that there wasn't an incursion again. That very well could be the case, like Rosemary's Baby, but it's actually, it's not a bastard line so much as it is an Israeli line. Anyways, that's just my 2 cents on that. So that goes against basically all Serpent Seed research, which I think I give myself permission to do it since I'm a Serpent Seed researcher myself. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. If you guys disagree with that, feel free. It won't hurt my feelings any at all. It's
an interesting take. I mean, it's usually a 180 reverse of what they're telling you it is. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I personally believe with in the world of research. What I see happening is that it's very popular just to take everything that comes along. Oh, that's true, and that's true. Oh, I like that. That's true. That's true. And you start putting the pieces together, and we talk about cognitive dissonance, how the blue pillars have this cognitive dissonance that actually doesn't end when you're a red pillar. There's still a lot of cognitive dissonance. And so if you take something like the Millennial Kingdom, which is a huge claim to say that this literally happened, it's a fulfillment. Maybe it didn't happen. I think it happened. And I'm still working out the details of what it looked like. But if it happened, then there are consequences to that. There are other implications that sometimes when, new pieces of information come along, you realize, what? Maybe I wasn't right about this over here, and you kind of have to drop it. And I've noticed that a lot in the truther community, where they will have these different ideas that actually seem to contradict each other, but they don't see it in their mind. It has to be true because so many people are saying it with a megaphone. So, I had to really kind of wrestle and deal with that. And maybe there was another incursion again. Maybe that's what they're telling us in movies like Rosemary's Baby. I wouldn't doubt that for a second, that they're not, that if the Watchers are back and so on and so forth, that they're, we know this with the UFOs, and they're taking people up there. And who was it? I brought someone on who, a UFO researcher, and she has claimed that she has been abducted like over 100 times, which is a pretty big claim. But she was of the opinion that like tens of thousands of people per night are being taken up by aliens in the world, which is a lot of people. So that's a lot of hybrid babies out there as well. Anyways, I don't want to keep you, Dan. I don't know how long you have with me.
Yeah, I mean, I would stay on all night. I've got a 5-year-old, and if he comes busting through the door, y'all are gonna know it because he is not shy at all. But I mean, I don't hear him right now, so we probably keep going for a little bit. But if I jump off, that's all it is. I love you guys. Thank you for having me on. And I'm okay. There was no emergency. I just had to jump off, so wasn't a distraction.
Well, is there something that you would like to, before your child bursts through the door? I have one of those two, a 2-year-old out there, a little girl. And I don't know if you guys could hear her. She was right outside this window earlier tonight, crying pretty heavily. I just kind of, daddy didn't hear anything. He's just going to continue on with this thing. Is there anything you would like to maybe throw out there before you do have to leave? Added thought.
And just that last piece that you were just talking about, being a truther is tough because you do have to eat pie a lot. Along the way, the last 20 years of doing this, there's many, many times where I'm like, man, I was so sold on this particular thing, but I've got new information now, and now I'm rethinking the whole thing, and that's okay. But I also think it's just let it be a warning for us that we shouldn't be dogmatic and hyper doctrinal about these types of things. Like feminine Holy Spirit's an example. I love talking about it. I think there's a lot of evidence for it. I'm just really careful, trying to be more careful about how I approach like the triune God. That's a lot to talk about there. And I just don't want to throw anybody off in their faith. So I think it's a good observation, Noel, to realize that, man, sometimes new information, you are going to change your mind. That's okay. But we should proceed with caution, knowing that that's possible to happen again.
Yeah. And it comes with, I think you have to be humble to be able to do that. I think the problem is that so many red pillars, they spend so much time burning bridges and, convincing themselves about how awake they are, and how much more knowledgeable they have than all the blue pillars out there, that they can't, like, they take these positions, all these die on the hill positions. And a lot of times I'm like, really, you want to die on that hill? Like, is it really worth it? Because I'm accused of, they call me a flip-flopper on some things. Michael, you were there for it. You remember we were doing the study and I was anti-Paul back then. Remember that? And I had the discussion with Michael, and this is when we had Rob on. It was the three of us. And I told you guys, I said, look, I don't want to, I'm like anti-Paul. I'm not going to like be preaching pro-Paul. I'm okay if you guys are. I'm totally okay if you guys are. You guys, I'm not going to stop you. You guys do what you want, And but eventually I got to the point where, I'm so pro Paul now. For a while I could like see both sides of the arguments. I'm almost at the point I can't even see the other side anymore. I'm so pro Paul, and I'm called like the major flip flopper in that, and they attack me heavily. And I don't get it, because like, why? Every single one of us, if we're truly seeking for the truth, we're going to realize that we go down this path and it's a dead end. There are dead end paths, and you have to be willing to go, you know what? I had some things right, but in this maze we're going through, it's not always a labyrinth. This could be a maze, and you hit that dead end, you got to backtrack and, retrace your steps again. So that's my encouragement for everyone out there, just to be humble in our pursuit to, to be okay when we were wrong about things. And to quote Yoda, you got to unlearn what you've learned. It happens a lot. Michael, is there anything else you want to throw in?
No, just appreciate you having us on, and just thank Dan for his knowledge and be able to share and his passion to speak to Freemasons, both current and those looking into it. So
yeah, this is the memes of where it was like that guy with the beard that's like smiling, kind of nervously, and he's, last week he was expert on such and such, he was expert last week on the Ukrainian war, and now he's expert on Iran or Palestine, whatever. It's always something, right? And obviously, like Dan, I really appreciate you, because I am not the expert on this kind of stuff. I mean, you encounter it enough, in your studies, but I haven't put a focus on Freemasonry. So I really appreciate you being here. And I will be calling you guys probably again here soon. This September, I took a year off, but, after I decided not to do the Torah portions this year, I had so many people approaching me going, man, why aren't you doing that? That was so helpful for my spiritual walk, and they want to do it again. So I'm going to be going through the Torah portions again. I guess, what is it, September, October, whenever you roll back the scroll. But I brought you guys on at least once, or Michael, I think a few times with you, and to bring on guests to give their perspective. So hopefully you guys will come back for that one week, and you'll go through the Torah portions with me. But yeah, I guess we'll just close on that. So thank you, Dan. Get back to your young child. I'll get to mine. And guys, go subscribe to Bromalogy, their YouTube channel. I should probably put the link below. Good night, everyone.